All right, let's look at state number 3. It's a hot, somewhat boring place with lots of sand. Different colors of sand, too. It's Arizona. Let's see how they stack up. I've broken the analysis down into 9 categories, as you guys know by now. You can check the description for timestamps if you want to skip around to those specific things, but I try to keep it short enough to where it's easy to just sit through the whole video and get an idea of the state. At the end, I'll be giving the state a grade based on the totality and compared to the other states we've talked about so far. If you like this type of content, you can let me know by liking the video and hitting subscribe. This helps to let me know what kind of content you guys like, what I should focus on, what I should make more of. It's also just a nice thing to do.
While the host of Fuddbusters is a lawyer, he is not your lawyer. If you pay him, maybe, either way you slice it, the video that you are about to watch is not to be construed as legal advice.
Right on. So now let's take a quick look at Arizona's state constitutional right to arms and kind of keep it in mind as we go through the rest of the video. Article 2, Section 26 of the Arizona Constitution provides that the right of the individual citizen to bear arms in defense of himself or the state shall not be impaired, but nothing in the section shall be construed as authorizing individuals or corporations to organize, maintain, or employ an armed body of men. In addition, state law states that the legislature has found that the citizens of the state have the right under the Arizona Constitution to keep and bear arms. So it's already dichotomous, right? We have a state constitutional provision that is outwardly suspicious of militias that are organized below the state level, but an act of the legislature recognizing an individual right to arms. Not the best we've seen so far at all. Even so, these provisions are only as good as the courts that are giving force to them, and it seems the Supreme Court of Arizona has been eager to show off its Gumby-esque spine when it comes to the right to bear arms in the state of Arizona. Since at least 1974, the Arizona Supreme Court has been notably noodly on the right to arms in the state. In State v. Rascon, the court upheld prohibitions on nonviolent felons owning arms. Following that, the Court of Appeals of Arizona repeatedly confirmed the noodliness of the constitutional provision, upholding a ban on concealed carry in 1990 and again in 1994, and then upholding a prohibition on possessing firearms within city parks in 1998. The logic of these cases was that the state constitution did not grant an absolute right to bear arms under all situations, but rather a wiggly noodle right that the court could pretend didn't exist whenever it was convenient. The way to get around the state right to bear arms, according to Arizona courts, is to simply invoke the magical phrase, "It merely regulates the manner in which people can exercise their right." So now let's talk about restrictions on owning firearms. This is, if you ask me, the most pernicious class of gun restriction. Prerequisites on owning a gun at all. Now this section will be limited to run-of-the-mill pedestrian firearms like handguns, shotguns, and rifles. State restrictions on NATO guns that the feds like to regulate will be in the cool gun restrictions section. To start with, there is no law in Arizona requiring gun owners to be licensed, nor any state gun registration. Further, the state has a supremacy law which dictates that no subdivision of the state may require the licensing or regulation of firearms or ammunition or related accessories. On top of that, there is a state law which prohibits any political subdivision from requiring or maintaining any kind of record of gun owners or purchases, except in the course of a law enforcement investigation. For all of you youngsters out there, Arizona prohibits anyone from selling or giving a firearm, ammunition, or a dangerous toy pistol to anyone under the age of 18 without the written consent of the minor's parent or guardian. Further, state law prohibits unemancipated minors that are under 18 from carrying or possessing a firearm, including in a vehicle, in any way that the firearm might be usable. This prohibition does not apply if the minor is accompanied by a guardian or certified whatever instructor. There is a specific carve-out for people aged 14 to 17 who are doing a shooting competition, on their way to a hunt, on their way to a shooting competition, but not after 10 p.m. or before 5 a.m., or doing a farming. As we know, federal law does prohibit a wide range of nonviolent felony and misdemeanor offenders from ever owning firearms, but being that most criminal prosecutions are on the state level, state policy can make a huge difference for people who spend their lives within the state. All that said, Arizona ain't doing you any favors. Arizona prohibits anyone from knowingly possessing a firearm if they were convicted of any felony, are in jail, yes, it specifically says that, are on probation for domestic violence or a felony, are not a United States citizen with some exceptions, have been adjudicated a danger to themselves or gravely disabled, or have been found incompetent or insane. The state also prohibits anyone who was adjudged a delinquent juvenile for a crime that would have been a felony from then having a firearm within 10 years of their release if the crime was burglary, arson, or a felony involving the use of a deadly weapon, or a serious offense. As for what happens if you become prohibited, Arizona has no laws requiring the disarmament of those prohibited from possessing firearms, except when a court issues a domestic violence protection order. Now onto restrictions on the actual purchase, buying, and selling of firearms. This specific section is for laws that restrict how an individual can acquire a firearm from somebody else. While federal law controls FFLs, it does not control how individuals inside a state can transact privately when it comes to firearms. This leaves a lot of opportunity for states to either respect or severely frustrate the rights of their residents. Of course, all those areas we discussed in the previous section where people are prohibited from possessing firearms under state law also prevent them from buying them. Add to that emergency orders against domestic violence in the state of Arizona may also prohibit defendants from purchasing firearms for the duration of that order. Remember, things like buying guns at gun shows and private sales are not loopholes to federal law. They are a natural result of our system of dual federalism, where the federal government is supposed to lack the power to touch purely intrastate transactions. All that said, Arizona does not require a background check or any specific paperwork when purchasing a firearm privately, nor any waiting periods, nor any laws about gun shows. Arizona also has no law requiring sellers to maintain records, except that pawnbrokers must maintain records of all reportable transactions and pawn tickets for 2 years. All right, now self-making firearms. As we've discussed here many times, the right to keep and to bear something necessarily includes the right to acquire it, and the purest way to acquire something is to make it for yourself. That's why it is definitely a point in Arizona's favor that it has no law restricting homemade, 3D printed, or otherwise lawfully unserialized firearms. All right, now how about ammunition? Another obvious prerequisite to a real right to keep and bear arms is the ability to feed them. A gat without gatteries is, of course, little use to me, I think. Arizona has no laws requiring a license for the sale of ammunition, nor does it require sellers to keep records of ammunition purchasers, nor does it independently prohibit those prohibited from possessing firearms from possessing ammunition, nor does it prohibit armor-piercing ammunition. That said, in Arizona, it is generally illegal to give or sell ammunition to someone under 18 without the written consent of the minor's parent or guardian. So I guess youngsters, you should have your parents fill out a bunch of little consent forms or something and just hand them out like candy. Not perfect, but far from the worst, I'd say. All right, carry restrictions. Of course, to keep and to bear arms includes bearing them. This is something that many states have slammed their heads against repeatedly and with great force. Prior to 2010, Arizona generally banned the practice of carrying a firearm in public unless the individual jumped through some hoops and got a permit. In April of 2010, however, Arizona began allowing any individual aged 21 or over to carry a concealed firearm without a license, provided the person inform any cop who asks that they are carrying a firearm. Still, the concealed carry permitting system remains in place for reciprocity purposes, and Arizona's permit is fairly well accepted by other non-completely insane jurisdictions. If you are seeking a concealed carry permit, Arizona is a shall-issue jurisdiction, provided you meet the following criteria. You are an Arizona resident or U.S. citizen, age 21 or older, who is not under indictment or convicted of a felony anywhere, not mentally weird, not unlawfully present in the United States, and have demonstrated firearm competence. The permits are valid for 5 years and are renewable for 5-year periods, with applicants taking a new background check every go-round. The state is not allowed to disclose information about permit holders to the public. However, it does maintain a database accessible to law enforcement officers. The state is also required to keep tabs on the number of permits requested, issued, and denied, and must report these figures annually to the governor and state legislature. As far as receiving reciprocity goes, Arizona will recognize a concealed weapon permit generally as long as the user is over 21, under 21, and no love in this desert place. But what about you guys who don't like to hide your hardware? Well, as far as open carry goes, Arizona does not prohibit it. In fact, visible weapons are exempted from many of their meager restrictions on carry in public. This kind of lines up with an approach taken in the mid-20th century where concealed firearms were treated with much less love than visible ones. In fact, in 2009, Arizona enacted a law that explicitly protected the defensive display of a firearm in particular situations, seemingly codifying the questionable just rack it to scare 'em approach. Well, what about in your car? Well, that 2010 law we mentioned earlier eliminated a requirement that anyone with a concealed weapon in their car must have a permit, so that's good to go now. Well, good to go as long as you're over 21 and willing to tell any cop who asks you that you're packing. These requirements apply only to guns that are immediately accessible and not to weapons that are carried in a case, holster, scabbard, or pack that is inside the vehicle or one of its storage compartments. As for nosy bosses and landlords, Arizona limits the ability of property owners from forbidding firearms in parking lots. Owners can't ban guns locked in cars or motorcycles as long as they aren't visible from the outside. Arizona also limits the ability of a school to prevent students from keeping blasters in their cars. Adults can have unloaded guns in their transportation on school grounds, provided it's locked and not visible from the outside. Speaking of schools, Arizona does forbid the possession of a gun on the grounds of any kindergarten, common, or high school, except for use in a program approved by the school or for someone authorized by the state to carry a firearm, such as in some cases concealed permit holders. That exception at the end does not apply to concealed carry permit holders at public schools because state law requires them to generally prohibit weapons unless specifically authorized by the school administrator. So private schools may allow concealed carry, but they are not required to allow it. As for colleges and universities, Arizona administrative regulations control the possession of firearms there. Last I checked, it was effectively banned. As for bars, Arizona specifically allows the carry of a handgun into licensed bars unless the owner posts a sign prohibiting the firearm with or without a carry permit. There is, however, a contradictory law still on the books that states that it is unlawful for anyone but a cop or concealed permit holder to possess a firearm while on an alcohol licensee's premises. Notwithstanding the above, Arizona does prohibit anyone from consuming alcohol while carrying a firearm in a licensed business, unless you're an undercover cop and you're sipping spirituous liquors while investigating the bar. Also, in addition to the issues with bars and schools, Arizona prohibits you from possessing a firearm in the following situations: at a polling place on election day, in a nuclear or hydroelectric plant, in a public place at a public event after being asked to remove it, in jail, plus other areas under state regulatory codes. Now on to self-defense regulations. Now, self-defense, it always feels a little weird talking about it in this show because it's not exactly gun law, but it is closely related and rapidly twisting across this country. Arizona has what's called a stand your ground law, meaning that there is no duty to retreat if you are threatened anywhere you legally can be and while you were not doing a crime. Also, Arizona law specifically authorizes the use of deadly force to prevent burglary. Some people might find this shocking, but burglary has always been recognized as a particularly dangerous common law felony. All right, time for cool gun restrictions. Here's where we'll talk about whether the state stacks stuff on top of the NFA and GCA when it comes to the cool guns the feds make us pay extra special taxes to own. Unfortunately, Arizona law sets up a class of prohibited weapons, including bombs, rockets, suppressors, machine guns, short-barreled firearms, Molotovs, chemical weapons, and IEDs. Arizona law treats possession of any of these weapons as a crime in and of itself unless they are possessed in accordance with federal law. Yet another example of a state me-tooing the NFA for no good reason. Very sad, many such cases. Aside from that, there are no restrictions on magazine capacity, caliber, or assaultiness of firearms in Arizona. We've talked a lot about losing your right to arms, but getting them back is just as important and something a lot of states fail miserably at. Arizona does have a mechanism for reinstating firearm rights, and people can have their rights restored after a certain number of years have passed, depending on the seriousness of the underlying offense. Some people are able to seek the return of their rights as early as 2 years after discharge. Additionally, the state installed a procedure in 2009 for people who lost their rights due to an adjudication of a mental issue to have their rights restored. Still, these mechanisms are fairly limited and result in the disarmament of nonviolent people for many years more than is necessary. Alright, now let's cover the various and sundries in Arizona before we get to a grade. State law preempts local gun laws in Arizona, preventing ambitious city councils from turning the state into a legal minefield. Arizona's preemption statute has been repeatedly challenged and held in favor of gun rights with a couple of exceptions. One of those cases, McMahon v. City of Tucson, involved the city insisting that a gun show require background checks on all private sales in order to use the convention center. The Arizona court that the preemption law did not prevent the city from regulating the use of the convention center in this way. Immediately after this decision, the Arizona legislature amended the law to prevent local governments from doing the same thing again. Also, interestingly, since 2013, Arizona state law requires that the police resell rather than destroy unclaimed or forfeited firearms, which is really neat. The city of Tucson had a law requiring that their department destroy these guns, and the state asked the city to repeal it. The city refused because it really loved the funny sounds guns made when they crunched them. So the legislature passed a law giving it the authority to withhold funding from cities that refuse to repeal laws that are inconsistent with state law. This was also hilarious. Tucson tried to sue so that they could keep on crunching on guns, but they lost, like little babies. Arizona's preemption law is one of the rare examples that actually has enforcement mechanisms, making local government actors personally liable for violations and awarding attorney's fees to people who sue. Political subdivisions who knowingly violate the gun preemption laws are liable for fines of up to $50,000, and the government official may be subject to termination. Arizona also prohibits individuals and local government from suing manufacturers of non-defective guns, parts, and ammunition when the criminal misuse of a firearm is at the core of the case. If your neighbors try to prevent you from using an outdoor shooting range by dragging you to court, Arizona state law also provides an affirmative defense to noise pollution claims if the range is in compliance with state law. Now, Arizona law does make parents liable for a minor's use of a firearm in certain situations. Arizona has no law restricting the purchase of multiple guns, no smart gun laws, no Saturday Night Special laws, no red flag law, and no other specific storage requirements. Alright, so let's see how this sandbox did, kind of using the previous states as a guidepost. I'm going to say that Arizona feels a little bit similar to Alaska with me, just on the totality. We've got the problematic wholesale recitation of some of the worst federal law for really no good reason, but this approval is not as frequent as we observed in Alaska. We've also got marginally worse carry laws compared to Alaska, but certainly better than Alabama. Another thought is Arizona's somewhat robust rights restoration system, although not as reassuring as Alaska's, which automatically restores civil rights, something that should be the norm, in my opinion. Most importantly for me, though, I think we've seen the state taking active steps in recent years to get better and treat gun owners with more respect. That's a big deal. I think on the total grade, Arizona sits just about even with Alaska, some ways for the better, some ways for the worse. I give it a B, but a high B, but not a B+. Not even close. If you think I'm wrong, or did I miss something, well, let me know in the comments. I expect to make a follow-up in the future if things change. Remember also to look at the date of publication of this video, as many things may be different if you're watching later on. Well, that's it for today, guys. Let me just say I really appreciate you watching and subscribing. It makes a huge difference for me. If you want to support me more than that, I have started up a Patreon and Subscribestar. There are benefits there like patron-only content, a Discord, and hopefully there's going to be more to come. This kind of support helps enable me to make more content more regularly, which I very much want to do. There's also a link to new Fuddbusters apparel, stickers, and the magic ATF ball, which is always useful, down in the description below. All of these things help out hugely. Thank you all so much for watching to the end and for your support. I'll see you next time, or if you join up on Patreon or Subscribestar, I'll see you on the Discord.